really good to see you, leader of the Reform Party.
Great to be with you, Jeremy.
I'm just going to throw something that I threw at Peter at you. How does this man, all the bluster and the blither and all that, and Pete, I know, agrees with me, how does he, with everything that's going on, have the British people literally in his hand? Because he does.
Ish. The reality is, we all love a brilliant, funny salesman. We all love being sold to, and what you often find with a good salesman is actually the reality behind the sales pitch isn't there. The delivery, the good that you've been sold, isn't there. And that's the thing with Boris. And yes, lots of people love that humour, that positive, upbeat stuff. But actually, there are many millions for whom literally tearing their hair out.
Yeah.
I think what we've learned, actually, he's brilliant at oratory.
He's the soundbite king, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. We now know where he's been for the last 2 weeks. He hasn't been running the country. He's been coming up with little gags for this speech. That's the reality. And yes, 10 out of 10 for oratory.
But does that frustrate a politician like you who wants to talk about the issues, who wants to talk about how are we going to level up, how are we going to get food on the shelves? It must frustrate you that this man could just stand up and, I mean, that's the greatest line I've ever heard. If Starmer had been Christopher Columbus, he'd have discovered Tenerife. That's legendary.
I think the reality is, yes, it sounds funny, but actually tens of millions of people across the country who are facing really difficult issues about how to pay bills, they want someone who's actually leading. They want someone who's actually going to diffuse a fuel crisis rather than just ignore it. They want someone who actually recognises, that actually energy bills are going up for millions of people as we speak, and we're just at the foothills of the green agenda. So it's like there's a guy, yes, brilliant salesman, but in reality, he's nowhere near planet Earth, planet UK. What's going on the ground?
Is he the man to fix the United Kingdom's problems?
Well. In reality, he got Brexit done with our help, of course. But in terms of going forward, look, he's not a detail man. No. The truth is, actually, he's not a brave man. He loves a great speech, but he is not a brave man. He is not Churchillian in any sense of the word. He doesn't dig into the detail, and he's reactive. He's not proactive. Tony Blair, at the time of the fuel crisis, first day, bang, he was there on the forecourt. Don't worry, we'll sort this out. Boris just waits and sees and sends out some junior minister. So it's very different. I think in terms of prospects of reality of delivery, I would say 1 out of 10.
Interesting, Pete. Yesterday, I mean, he delivered. You weren't. I think you were doing something else. Somebody came on and said to me, it was almost like a Gerald Ratner moment. You know, the guy that ran and he said, all my stuff's crap. And Boris Johnson said yesterday, and I quote, all this country's problems aren't my responsibility. And everybody's screaming at the television going, well, that's what we voted you for. And yet again, gone.
Boris Johnson has been throughout his entire career someone who has broken the rules and got away with it. Yeah. Someone who does not have the same conventions in terms of politics. So many times he's been written off. So many times people say, this is it. It's the end of Boris. I remember I worked in politics for 3.5 years. I remember people saying there was about a 6-month period after he resigned as foreign secretary, threw his toys out of the pram over Brexit. And I remember people saying, this is it. Boris is over. And I remember thinking, well, there have been so many times when he's come back, and I think he'll go on probably as long as he wants to. I think leading the Conservative Party into the 2024 or indeed 2023 election, depending on how soon that is.
Do you think he wants a legacy, or do you think he wants to give it up and write and make some money?
I think nobody leaves 10 Downing Street voluntarily.
It's a really interesting point, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is he'll either leave of his own volition or because he makes some terrible mistake and he has to go. But in truth, people like to be led by an optimist, someone who makes them feel good, and that's his magic compared to Starmer. You know, Starmer's a detail man.
What did you make of his speech last week?
After about 65 minutes, I had to give myself a slap around the face to wake me up.
See, that's what I would find really frustrating. If Keir Starmer was my political bag, right? I would have been like that. Oh, come on.
The thing is, you can't remember a word Starmer said, right?
But I mean, I'm going to pay you a compliment. The first time we spoke on the show 2 weeks ago, you have a presence about you. You talk brilliantly. There's passion in your voice. The same as Boris. Keir Starmer's about as interesting as, isn't he? I mean, there's nothing there.
Jeremy, it is literally my job to listen to these speeches. About halfway through Keir Starmer's speech, I went to get a cup of tea and a sausage roll.
Did you?
I did.
A nice sausage roll?
It was a lovely sausage roll.
Not a vegan sausage roll?
Definitely not. No,
the
the pig did not die.
I come from the world of business, and there's a simple theory: accountants and lawyers don't make good chief executives because they can't excite and they can't motivate.
Why don't accountants look out of the window in the morning? So they've got something interesting to do in the afternoon. That's a good idea. We got that in there, absolutely. But despite that, I watched today's speech. I watched the clips. I'm not quite sure, apart from this levelling up, which I think is absolutely good and proper and right and probably should have been done many years ago. Didn't hear any actual policy detail.
No, I mean, zero. There was no detail behind it. And, he had a great line about what Thatcher would do looking after the money. Let me tell you, Margaret Thatcher would not have wasted and spent the hundreds of billions that this government has spent. That's why we would have been in a very different place.
What would she have thought of Boris Johnson?
She would have thought that he was a lightweight, someone who was a good speaker, who could have entertained the crowd at conference.
Heseltine-esque.
Oh no, much more lightweight. I mean, Heseltine had, he had real gravitas in terms of detail, deep passion about what he wanted to do in terms of regenerating places like Liverpool and things. No, Thatcher would have thought that Boris was a humorous warm-up act.
An oath.
I don't know if she would have used that language, but a warm-up act. That's basically what she would have thought of him. She had in her cabinet, she had really serious, successful people who'd been around the block, who'd done things.
And you talk about brave. I mean, somebody said to me once, why did Margaret Thatcher, having won 3 elections, only last 11 years? Well, you've got 400 MPs, you have a cabinet of 20. If they don't agree with you, sack them. In the end, they'd all been sacked, hadn't they? And they all got in a room and went, I think we'll get rid of her. But she was brave, certainly. Do you think Boris Johnson's brave, Peter?
I think he has been brave. I think he's done some things that defy convention, but also he knows he can get away with it. So there's almost a lack of bravery there. I think if a number of politicians had done some of the things he had done, especially on COVID, furlough, for example, is a very unconservative policy. Some people see it as socialism, for example. They probably wouldn't have got away with it. But he, as I say, just completely defies convention and will continue to. And the lack of any strong opposition, certainly from the Labour Party in this country, is allowing him to get away with what he's getting away with.
I wonder, let's talk about the Reform Party, because we had Belinda de Lucy on last week. Tell the great story about, you've had the conference in the same city.
Yes, we thought it was
brilliant.
We thought it was sensible. We would break all the gentlemanly rules, which is that parties, they sort of follow up in a queue and they have it in different cities. No, forget that.
We're going straight to have it in Manchester.
We thought we'd disrupt, we'd have it in the same place at the same time, make it easy for the journalists. So we got some media coverage, and we've got a nice open-top double-decker bus, and we thought that it would be appreciated if that was driven around with a nice advertising hoarding on the side that said, Tory boiler ban will freeze your gran. And that went down rather well. It was on the Sunday Times. And, you've got to create news. But in reality, I call the Conservative Party, I now call them the Consocialists, because they've moved on to the Labour Party turf. They're the party of high tax, high regulation, nanny state. It's an authoritarian. And there's no indication at all that any of them have any intent to move from that. And I think for the nation, so we stand for cutting taxes hard for the lowest paid and smaller businesses, because that's how you generate growth. And you can't tax your way out of this crisis, Jeremy. You've got to grow your way out of it. You've got to put the foot literally in 8th gear on the accelerator, grow your way out of it. We're the only people with a vision for the NHS which is simple: 0 waiting lists. Why do we accept waiting lists in this country? No one else does around the West.
But it's a tremendous concept, but it just drinks money, isn't it?
No, not actually. If you put the power in the hands of the patient, not the bureaucratic monopoly provider.
People running.
You say to the
computers,
patient, if you can't be seen by a GP in 3 days, you get a voucher, you can go private. If you can't be seen by a specialist, 3 weeks, voucher, go private. If you can't get an operation, 8 or 9 weeks, you get a voucher, you go private. Guess what will happen? The private capacity will mushroom. And we've polled it. 81% of people don't care who gives them the care. They just want the pain sorted. They want the suffering gone. They want it done. And so that's our big vision for the health system. There's a healthcare crisis in this country. Boris may not have realised.
I think there's many crises, and I go back to it, Peter, as well. I just think that any other leader, one thing would have just brought them down. And you're a political person. We do this show. We're interested in it. I just look at him, not in awe, because I can see, that comment just is ridiculous. And what did I read this morning? He went for his morning run and then got driven back in a car and stopped 50 yards from the hotel and got out and ran into the foyer.
Brilliant. Classic Boris.
Upstairs for a bacon sunny. And went
Boris.
running the other day in his black shoes, his office shoes, an office shirt and a pair of swimming shorts because he'd forgotten his running stuff. But it is classic Boris.
Despite all the running, he never seems to change shape. It doesn't seem to do him any good.
No, he's not losing any. No, and the hair doesn't. But still, people follow him. And you are right. Whether it's showman, whether it's gravitas, there's something about him, isn't there?
There absolutely is.
And I think the British people. I think it'd be very interesting next election, because I think it would be very easy for his critics to say, right, all we've done is talk about you. All we've done is listen to you say for 5 years that because of the pandemic and because of Brexit, it's been very difficult. But I still, honestly, in my heart of hearts, think he could stand up and we could have no food on the shelves. Christmas could have been cancelled. The pandemic could come back. The whole thing could go completely wrong. And he'd still win. And that fascinates me in a really weird way.
Well, it's a really interesting insight into leadership, actually.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the historians will look at is that leadership quality of constantly looking ahead, looking at the sunny uplands and giving a positive message to whether it's to people in a business, whether it's to troops in an army, or whether actually the people of a nation. And I think that's the really extraordinary thing about his personality that people will write about.
When you came in and I started this to both of you, I said, Starmer must be pulling his hair out. A 90-minute speech. He said, I've got the Labour Party now where I want it. Obviously, it was a hatchet job from the Corbyn fans. The only thing I imagine the majority of British people will think about Keir Starmer over the next few days is that he was called Captain Hindsight by Boris Johnson, and that Columbus joke. That must be so soul-destroying.
And that he's just maybe a bit boring as well. I mean, you look at even his deputy, Angela Rayner, made so many more headlines, so much more memorable by calling the senior Conservatives Tory scum, for example. I mean, that's what a lot of people will remember from that conference.
I think it's fair to say that Starmer has got a much harder job trying to lead the Labour
Absolutely.
Party.
He wanted it.
Than frankly, any leader's got trying to lead the Conservative Party. I mean, because the Labour Party is not one party. It's about 3 or 4 different parties.
But you're right about Boris, and we must move on. They are famous, the Tory party. When they've had their fill of you, or you've done what they want, they will knife him in the back. Very interesting. Richard, seriously, I've never even thought about the Reform Party, but meeting you and Belinda last week, fascinating. Thank you for being on. The world's best political editor. This is Talk Drive, just gone 4:30 headline.